It was actually interesting to hear Dave mention Mitchell and Ness because for years I've had on my wall a Mitchell and Ness replica of a Pittsburgh Pirates Roberto Clemente jersey, and I'll tell you why. So, when I was 5 years old, I was diagnosed with Tourette Syndrome. And if you're not familiar, Tourette Syndrome is a nervous system disease where it causes someone to tick, like whether that's motor tics or verbal tics. A lot of people, when they think of Tourette's, they usually think of like uncontrollable swearing, and that's only a very small portion of the people with Tourette's. It's really a vast spectrum. Like my tics were mostly like contorting my face or throwing my head around or grunting like like that very loudly. And when you're 5 years old, and maybe it's changed since then, but back when I was diagnosed, there's not a lot that a doctor can do. There's really no cure for it. They can give you some medication to help kind of calm the tics a little bit. And they gave me a DVD titled I Have Tourette Syndrome, but Tourette Syndrome Doesn't Have Me, which is way too long of a title. But I watched this DVD, and I remember there was a kid on there who looked about my age, who was about 5 years old, and he said on there, Tourette's makes you a marked man. And I remember thinking, that is way too profound of a thing for a 5-year-old to be saying. But he was right. When you have that disease, it makes you feel like you have a scarlet letter. It's often the first thing that people see when they see you for the first time. It's something that people judge you for. And, it's something that many people just don't understand, especially children, And when I was a kid, I felt like I was always getting questions about it, Why can't you stop? Why won't you shut up? Things like that. And it's just hard to explain to people that, I can't help it. It's my nervous system. I can't stop it. And, eventually, over the years, I went to a small enough school that I eventually knew everybody, and they all knew me, and they kind of got used to it, so it didn't bother them so much. But unfortunately, with teachers, that was another story, because with teachers, I was a distraction to them. And often, pretty much every year, the same thing happened, where before the school year starts, me and my parents have a sit-down meeting with the teacher, and we explain to them that I had Tourette's, that I might twitch during class, and they'd say, that's probably fine, we'll just see how it goes. And then a week into the school year, the teacher would call us back in for a second, much more serious meeting. And at one point, I had a teacher call me up to her desk, and she started asking me about potentially going to a different classroom. And at first I thought that she was asking me if I wanted to be put in the advanced placement class. And I thought I was confused by that. And then I realized that she was asking me if I wanted to be in the special ed kids class with the kids who were mentally challenged. And luckily the principal knew me very well, and she was a big supporter of mine. And she said, no, Ryan's perfectly capable. He should be able to stay in the class with all the other kids. But it's something very frustrating, because you feel like in school your teacher should be the one person that makes you feel like you belong there, like they should be your advocate. And when it doesn't feel like they're advocating for you, it can be very frustrating and hurtful as a kid. But I was lucky that I had one really great teacher, and that was Mrs. Bragg in the 4th grade. Mrs. Bragg had been teaching for probably close to 40 years when she had me. She had seen everything. Nothing was going to faze her. And so when she met me and she knew I had Tourette's, she thought, this is going to be difficult, but we'll get through it together. And eventually we had a project called Famous Pennsylvanians, and this was a really cool project. Each one of us was assigned a famous Pennsylvanian, where we would research them and then dress up as them. And in our cafeteria, we each had little stations, and the students and the staff and the parents would come in and talk to each of us in our character as our famous Pennsylvanian. And since I was a big baseball fan, I was assigned Roberto Clemente. And if you don't know much about Roberto Clemente, he was a very, very famous baseball player for the Pittsburgh Pirates. He was originally from Puerto Rico, but he played for many years for the Pirates in the 50s and 60s. He won a few championships with them, and I believe he's the first Latino player to be inducted into the Baseball Hall of Fame. And I really enjoyed learning about him and reading books about him and researching him. And one day, while we were in the school library, we were all researching our Pennsylvanians, and I was having a really rough tick day that day. You know, when your stress level is high, the tics seem to get a little more out of control. I was grunting loudly, and I could just feel the stares and the looks and the snickering coming from everyone around me in this silent library. And I was just really self-conscious. I felt really embarrassed in that moment. And then Mrs. Bragg says, "Ryan, would you come out to the hallway with me for a minute?" And I thought, oh no, like, I've broke her. It happens every time she's reached her limit. She's going to tell me to leave. She's going to tell me to shut up. I just know it. And I reluctantly walk out into the hallway, and she looks at me and she goes, "You know, Roberto Clemente also had Tourette's." And I was like, "Really?" She goes, "Yeah, he did. He twitched and grunted just like you, and he would have trouble in interviews and trouble with his teammates and things, but he didn't let that stop him. He worked hard, he ignored others, and he never gave up, and he became one of the best at what he did." And that meant the world to me. I had never heard of an adult having Tourette's, let alone anyone who was successful. And so that just filled me with joy, and I felt like I was on top of the world for just that moment. And every once in a while, I'll have those days where the tics are ramping up and I feel embarrassed, and those feelings of self-consciousness creep back in, and I start to think to myself, what would Roberto Clemente do? And one day, a few years ago, I was having those thoughts, and I thought, you know, I've never actually looked up any of those interviews that she was talking about. And so I just Googled Roberto Clemente Tourette's, and there's no evidence that he ever had Tourette's or anything like it. She completely made it up just to make me feel good. And it's one of the kindest things anyone's ever done for me. So, you know, every once in a while I have those days and I start to think to myself, what would Mrs. Bragg do? She would work hard, she would ignore others, she would never give up on me. Thank you very much.